Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time you're watching this. Today's case is one that I think maybe a lot of people might know. Today's case is a case that sits really personally with me. Although I didn't know anyone involved, well, you've seen the title. So today's video is about the devastating case of Dimebag Darrell. If you don't know of Dimebag Darrell, where have you been? Dimebag Darrell was the guitarist in a band called Pantera. Pantera were a huge heavy metal band in the 90s. If you like heavy metal or rock music now, I can be very sure that those new bands that you're listening to were highly influenced from Pantera. Or if you have a favourite guitarist, they were most likely influenced by Dimebag Darrell. Pantera were one of the leading bands in the 90s for heavy metal. I am going to get into this in more detail, but their sound really did influence and change the metal that we knew in the 90s. So beyond Pantera being known for being one of the biggest heavy metal bands of the 90s and Dimebag Darrell being a highly influential guitarist of the 90s, they were also known for something horrifically tragic. And that is the case that we will be talking about today. I just want to put out here as well, I know that Pantera have a huge amount of fans, and I have tried to look at every source I can to research this, and I really have tried to do my best. If I miss anything, please feel free to tell me. I'm not going to be offended, but I did want to get this as close to the truth as I possibly could. So I just hope I do this case justice, because I am a fan of Pantera, have been for many, many years, a big fan of Dimebag Darrell, but I know that there are more people out there who are a bigger fan than I am, and I just hope that I do this case justice for you. Darrell Lance Abbott was born in Ennis, Texas on August 20th, 1966. Ennis is a small town southeast of Dallas. When Google searching Ennis, I found it to be really small, which actually really fascinated me because I find it so interesting that such a powerful, influential person came from such a small town. In fact, two people, because we're not obviously forgetting Vinnie Paul. Darrell was the second son of Carolyn and Jerry Abbott. Jerry Abbott was a country music producer, which must have been a big influence to his sons, as both of them would one day start playing instruments and make a band together. Darrell's elder brother was Vinnie Paul. Vinnie was born on March the 11th, 1964, and the pair had an unbreakable bond. From the ages of 12 and 14, the pair would play music together. They both started playing the drums, but Vinnie was better than Darrell and then refused to let him play. So Darrell took up the guitar. Vinnie said that he would play drums from the moment he got in from school, right up to when it was too late to play anymore. His neighbours would often call the police for noise complaints. Vinnie completely loved the drums, and Darrell soon fell in love with playing the guitar. When they were 13 and 15, Carolyn and Jerry would divorce, but the family was still very loving and happy. Darrell and Vinnie would live with Carolyn in Arlington, and Jerry lived relatively close by. Darrell would ride his bike to go see his dad, and often the two would work on Darrell's guitar skills. Carolyn was also very enthusiastic about Darrell and Vinnie's musical endeavours. Darrell and Vinnie were always playing music together, and then they decided to form a band called Pantera. Vinnie had met bassist Rex Brown in high school. They had been in a jazz band together, but they both realised that they preferred heavier music and jammed together outside of school. They also met their original lead singer, Terry Glaze, at high school too. Pantera would play covers at clubs such as the Arlington Metal Shop, the Rock Haven, and Dallas City Limits. Jerry told the brothers that they would never reach true level of success unless they started writing their own songs. The band would send cassettes to major labels and try to sell their CDs. But when the band found a lack of interest from buyers of their CDs and labels not getting back to them, Terry decided to leave the band. The band members also had a conflict of music genre they wanted to play, as Darrell and Vinnie aspired for a heavier sound. After looking for a new singer for around 6 months and trialling different frontmen, the band found Phil Ansamo, a frontman who had been travelling the same circuit as Pantera. Phil was originally in a band called Razor White, and Pantera fans said that the lead singer from this band would be perfect for the future of Pantera. At the same time, Razor White fans would approach Phil, and they would say that he'd be perfect as the frontman of Pantera. Soon after this, Vinny got Phil's number and they had a good conversation, which developed into the band flying Phil down from New Orleans to Texas to play together. It was immediate chemistry, and Vinnie Paul said it was like we had been in the band together for 5 years. After this, Phil never went back home and he flew his possessions down to Texas and the band took off from there. In 1988, the band produced their debut album, Power Metal. Looking back, the band wasn't too proud of this record, but they were proud that they were moving in the right direction of heavier music. Shortly after their album release, Megadeth, a huge metal band at the time, had parted ways with their guitarist. They reached out to Darrell and asked if he would be their new shredder. However, Darrell told them that unless they took him and Vinny, he would not leave Pantera. It was this moment that the band sat down together and decided to completely restyle themselves, musically and in their appearance. They ditched the glam rock look and wrote 3 new songs in a weekend: Cowboys from Hell, Psycho Holiday, and The Art of Shredding. If you know Pantera, you will know that these songs were huge for the band, so this was a major turning point for them. It was at this point that word was getting around about Pantera. An artist and repertoire man, A&R for short, had noticed Pantera and was very interested in them. This man was called Derek Shulman. When one of his scouts got stuck in Dallas after a hurricane, he was sent to go and see Pantera live and see if they were any good. The only gig that they had booked was at a young girl's birthday party at a local Mexican restaurant. I don't know why as well, but when I read that part, it immediately took me to the music video of Redneck by Lamb of God. Hearing Pantera and little girl's birthday party, it just doesn't seem to work, but what a cool child, what cool parents for allowing that to happen. The band had heard that a scout from Atco Records was coming to see them play, but the band didn't notice them and they didn't play their best as they were positioned in the corner of a slippery dance floor and didn't want to move too much for risk of an accident. However, the scout had turned up and after 4 songs he was utterly wowed by Pantera. He called Shulman and told him to get down to Texas and see this band for himself. The following week, Shulman travelled down and saw the band play. He said it was the best band that he'd ever seen live, and weeks later they were signed to Atco Records. Darrell and Vinny's dad Jerry didn't just give Darrell guitar lessons, he also managed the band from 1981 to 1989, when the band landed this major record deal. Jerry wasn't sad to step down though, he realised and knew that for Pantera to thrive, they had to be under a major metal record label. In 1992, Pantera released their 5th album, Cowboys from Hell. This was their first album under Atco Records. Most fans now consider this to be their official debut album. It was viewed as one of the best and most defining albums of the 90s. Songs from this album have been consistently covered. Bands to have covered songs from this album include Apocalyptica and Bullet for My Valentine. Cowboys from Hell was also featured on Guitar Hero 2 as one of the harder songs to complete. The album was ranked number 11 on the October 2006 issue of Guitar World magazine's list for the greatest 100 guitar albums of all time. In 1992, the band released their 6th album, Vulgar Display of Power, and in 1994, they released their 7th album, Far Beyond Driven, which debuted at number 1 in the United States. The band had hit an all-time high with their legion of fans. They were hugely popular and consistently touring with shows back to back. Due to this, the band members all had a very close brotherly bond, and they would constantly work together. Even when they were off tour, they would be in the studio recording music for new albums. In 1992, Anselmo was charged with an assault of a security guard when the security guard would not let fans on stage. Anselmo was released on bail the following day and officially charged in 1995. He apologised and pleaded guilty, and he was ordered to undergo 100 hours of community service. When the band came back to go on tour again, Anselmo had a different presence and the band started to struggle working with him. As a band that loved to party, this became extremely apparent when Phil would distance himself from the other band members and prefer to be on his own than to party with the rest of the band. In 1994, Phil Anselmo had been diagnosed with a severe back injury. When on stage with Pantera, he would headbang and he would crash and thrash around. Over the years, the accumulated physical damage took a toll. He blew a disc out in his back, destroying the cartilage around it. The bone scraped on the bone. He toured more and destroyed more cartilage. Doctors did tell him that he could undergo corrective surgery, but this would mean that he would be unable to tour and perform for more than a year, which made Phil look for other alternatives. Initially, Anselmo found medication in the form of alcohol, but when this wasn't enough, Phil found himself addicted to heroin. In 1996, Phil Anselmo, after a show in Texas, actually had an overdose, and he had died for 2 minutes before being brought back to life via resuscitation. This was the point in which the band found out the true cause of Anselmo's personality change. The addiction caused tension throughout the band. Anselmo also said negative things on stage which the band did not appreciate. The rest of the band wanted to be more about the music they produced, rather than the personal opinions or political standings. Because of the tensions within the group, Anselmo started working on new side projects. He became part of bands Superjoint Ritual and Down. Pantera started suffering the weight of Phil's responsibilities to other bands. In 1996, Pantera released their next album, The Great Southern Trendkill, but this one was different to the rest as Anselmo actually recorded his part separately to the rest of the band. Vinny, Darrell and Rex would record the album together and Phil's vocals were added later. When I had researched this, I actually didn't know that that album was produced separately. However, when I went back and listened to it, I think you can clearly hear that it's not as cohesive as their other albums. Like, by no means am I a music producer or know anything about editing music, but when you listen to that album and then you go and listen to something like Vulgar Display of Power, you can really hear the difference in the cohesiveness of the music. And I'm really sorry if it's anyone's favourite album from the band, but it just doesn't feel as impactful as some of their other albums to me. So before this point, Pantera would have albums coming out almost every other year. However, from this point, Pantera did not make another album until 2000, which was their last studio album entitled Reinventing the Steel. They would tour throughout the year 2000 and play their last show together in Japan in 2001. In 2001, Phil would tell Vinny that he wanted to take a break from touring, which Darrell and Vinny agreed upon. However, Phil would then continue touring with his new bands, Superjoint Ritual and Down. This caused friction between Phil and the Abbott brothers, and to this day there is no concrete evidence of what the conversation actually was, but because of this, there were issues between the brothers and Phil. In 2003, it was announced that Pantera was no more. Darrell was particularly broken by the end of Pantera. It was Darrell and Vinny's passion, and they tried to figure out a way to keep Pantera going. However, legalities over the rights of the music and Pantera as a brand made this a problem that felt unsolvable. So, the Abbott brothers decided that the best thing to do would be to construct a whole new band instead. And in 2003, Damage Plan was born. Damage Plan was made up of Dimebag Darrell, Vinnie Paul, Patrick Lockman, and Bob Kakahar. In February 2004, Damage Plan released their debut album, Newfound Power. Unfortunately, the album did not receive the best reception, and the band found themselves playing at much smaller venues than Pantera had been playing only years before. This didn't deter the band though, especially Darrell and Vinny, as they were just so happy to be playing again. Darrell wasn't about the massive fan base and the fame. He was all about playing on stage and sharing his music with whoever would listen. For Dimebag, music was a true passion and a true love. Later in 2004, Damage Plan are touring and playing venues and experiencing their lives as Damage Plan for the first time. And on the 8th of December 2004, the band played their final song at the Alrosa Villa nightclub in Columbus, Ohio. An attendee of this show was a 25-year-old Nathan Gow. Nathan Gow was an ex-Marine Corps, and it is said that he joined the Marine Corps after being inspired by the September 11th, 2001 attacks. His mother had gifted him a Beretta pistol when he got into the Marine Corps as a Christmas present when he had passed basic training. Gow had previously been in trouble with the law over cases of assault and theft. Gow did not complete his 4 years of training in the Marine Corps and was discharged due to a paranoid schizophrenia diagnosis. The doctors had given Gow medication, but after he returned home, he refused further medical treatment. Gow was obsessed Pantera fan and would listen to them before playing American football. He became obsessed with the band in high school. One report stated from a friend of Nathan's that one day he came home and was accusing Pantera of plagiarizing his lyrics. He was also very stern in his beliefs that the lyrics were stolen and Pantera wanted to steal his identity. This was a point in which Gow's friends started to distance themselves from him as his behavior was becoming more and more erratic. Another report was that he had told his friends that God wanted him to kill Marilyn Manson. His friends and family did not consider him to be dangerous, however, even though Gow would rock back and forth and walk an invisible dog that he also spoke to. So back to December the 8th, and as the support bands were playing and Damageplan were getting ready to play their set, Gal had turned up to Damageplan's headline show. Gal was walking around the building and gained attention from the club manager, who questioned Gal and what he was doing. Gal then replied, "I don't want to see no shitty bands, I'm going to wait for Damageplan." It is later said that the security then also clocked Gal, but presumed he was loitering and trying to get into the show for free. Gal had plans to come into contact with the band before they got into the venue. He had hoped that he would see them getting off their tour bus, but upon missing them outside, Gal then knew that he had to get close to the band by backstage access. Gal had originally tried to assault the band sooner on another show where he managed to get on stage, but a security guard had stopped him. He was unarmed and the band did not feel threatened by this incident. Because of this, however, this time Gal was armed with the loaded Beretta pistol I mentioned earlier. Gal scaled a fence around the back of the club and managed to find a side entrance with an unlocked door. At this moment, Damageplan were on stage beginning to play their set. Security had noticed Nathan, but they weren't rushing to stop him, as they didn't believe him to be a threat, more a fan just trying to get in without a ticket. Gal has now reached the stage, and just 90 seconds into Damageplan's set, he shoots Dimebag Darrell in the head. He shot Darrell a further 3 times, one hitting his cheek, one hitting his hand, and one hitting his left ear. There was other reports that Gal had actually hit him all 4 times in the head, and there was other reports that he hit him once in the head, once in the back of the head, once in the chest, but this was the one that I found that seemed to be most cohesive over the research sites that I looked at. Once Gal was sure that he had killed Darrell, he began shooting at other people. He managed to shoot their tour manager, Chris Paluska, in the chest. At this point, Damageplan's chief of security, Jeff Thompson, wrestled Gal to the floor, but was also shot 3 times, which was fatal for Thompson. The crowd at this point are believing that this is to be part of the show, and some of the fans are shouting and cheering. One fan who didn't believe this was a hoax was 23-year-old Nathan Bray, who jumped up onto stage to try and help Dimebag and Thompson, but he unfortunately would also die after being shot and murdered by Gal. Erin Hawke, an Alrosa Villa employee, had also tried to help but was fatally shot by Gal too. Erin Hawke, Jeffrey Thompson and Nathan Bray died heroes. The massacre unfortunately did not stop there. With the crowd now realising this was not a joke, and the band not knowing what to do in this situation but to try and get help, the club turned into a panicked frenzy. Attendees were running to escape, the band was screaming for help and to call 911, and Gal is attempting to take as many lives as possible. Travis Burnett from the support band Volume Dealer attempted to disarm Gal but was shot at. He fortunately did not die, but the bullet grazed his left forearm. Burnett fled the scene when Gal was attempting to murder him by shooting at his head. These shots fortunately missed. Drum technician John Cap Brooks also attempted to subdue Gal, but he was shot twice in the leg before being taken hostage by Gal. 911 had been called, and they arrived in 3 minutes of the call being taken. James Negemeyer was the police officer on the scene. He entered through the back door and shot Gal once in the head with a shotgun and killed him. This entire horrific ordeal lasted just 3 minutes. Fatal victims of the attack were Darrell Abbott, Jeffrey Thompson, Nathan Bray, and Erin Hawke. When Gal was dead, police searched his body and found that the loaded ammunition was only halfway used, and he had another 30 rounds of ammunition on his person. Suspicions clearly point to the fact that Gal had planned for a huge, devastating massacre and wanted to take even more innocent lives than he did before he was shot. Fans tried to resuscitate Darrell at the scene before paramedics arrived, but unfortunately, when paramedics attended to Abbott, he was declared dead. Darrell Abbott was only 38 years old when he died. There still hasn't been concrete reasoning as to why Gal did what he did, but there are 2 theories that continuously come up. One being that he felt that Pantera plagiarized his lyrics and were trying to steal his identity, and the other is that he was mad at the Abbott brothers for the split of Pantera. It is said that when Gal took his first shot, he shouted something towards Darrell. Later reports stated that he said, "This is for breaking up Pantera." The claim of Gal being angry about Pantera's split is backed by an article in a Metal Hammer magazine interview, where Anselmo stated that Abbott deserves to be beaten severely. There is no evidence that Gale read this article, but with being the huge obsessed fan that he was, people believe that he did read this interview and obtained huge resentment over Dimebag Darrell and Vinnie. Later, when Vinnie Paul heard the interview audio, he concluded that Anselmo had not been joking about the severe beating, and from that point on, he decided to no longer speak to Phil Anselmo or bassist to Pantera, Rex Brown. Since the shooting, many venues have made their security procedures a lot more strict, with many hiring undercover police officers as security. Abbott was deeply loved and respected by the heavy metal music community, and his death created a mass outpouring of grief among other bands and artists of the time. One of the first artists to create a musical tribute to Abbott was the Black Label Society, who dedicated their music video for In This River to Abbott. Typo Negative, who were close friends of Abbott, waited until 2007 to release the track Halloween in Heaven. Frontman Peter Steele told MTV, "I didn't want to exploit Abbott's name because it was so soon after his death." Vinnie Paul donated an unreleased 24-second guitar solo to Nickelback that they had incorporated into the 2005 track Side of a Bullet, which describes the shooting from the point of view of the killer. The 2005 albums 10,000 Fists by Disturbed, Life's Blood for the Downtrodden by Crowbar, and Start a War by Static X were all dedicated to Abbott's memory. Thousands of fans attended his public memorial, and the guest list included artists such as Eddie Van Halen, Zakk Wylde, Corey Taylor, and Dino Cazares. I really hope I've said his name right there. I always seem to get his name wrong, but Fear Factory. Abbott was buried alongside his mother Carolyn at the Moore Memorial Garden Cemetery in Arlington, Texas. Gene Simmons donated a Kiss casket for the burial, and Eddie Van Halen donated his original black and yellow striped 1979 Charvel Bumblebee guitar, which was featured on the back cover of Van Halen 2. A few weeks prior to his death, Abbott had met Van Halen and asked him for a replica of the Bumblebee. Van Halen said at the funeral, "Dime was an original, and only an original deserves the original." Phil Anselmo was not invited to Darrell's official funeral. Anselmo still feels sadness for not being able to say goodbye properly to Darrell, but the close friends and family decided he was not welcome. Vinnie Paul never recovered over the loss of his brother, but eventually was able to have interviews discussing his brother. Vinnie mentions that Darrell's last words to him were "Van Halen man," which was their code word to one another to have a good time on stage. Vinnie Paul would also pass away in 2018 at the age of 54. He is now buried next to his brother Darrell. In 2015, Dimebag Darrell was ranked as one of the most influential metal guitarists of the past 25 years by VH1. Also in 2015, Dimebag Darrell was placed at number 5 on Gibson's list of the top 10 metal guitarists of all time. A concert in memory of Dimebag Darrell, entitled Dime Bash, has been held annually since 2010. All of the concert's proceeds go towards the Ronnie James Dio Stand Up and Shout Cancer Fund. So that was the extremely sad case of Dimebag Darrell. It's a case that I've wanted to do since I started this channel, which I know wasn't long ago, but it was one of the cases that I really wanted to cover here. I really hope I have given enough information about this case, enough information about Nathan Gale, and enough information about the background of Dimebag Darrell and Vinnie Paul. I also wanted to talk more about Phil Anselmo because I had read a lot of things that just said, got addicted to heroin, got addicted to heroin. And I found it quite sad because he only got addicted to heroin as a form of medication for his back. Now, I'm not justifying his actions, I'm not justifying what he's done, but to just say that he was addicted to heroin and that's why he became the way he did, I feel that was very unjust. He had been a great frontman for Pantera, and because he really threw himself around and gave everyone a show, that is why he damaged his back, and that is why he became addicted to heroin. It still doesn't back up why he said what he said, in multiple occasions though. I think testimony of how influential Dimebag Darrell was still stands to this day. People still talk about him, people are still influenced by him, and he obviously was just such a powerful musician to be that renowned now. The case is incredibly sad. He did not need to be murdered. No one needs to be murdered. I just find it really sad that all he wanted to do was just play music, and probably till the day he died, which he did, but not on his terms. If you watched till the very end of this video, thank you so much. A very extra special thank you goes out to you. I genuinely love doing this. I hope this was informative. I hope this covered all the bases that needed to be covered. As always, my love, respect and feelings go out to those that are still affected by this tragedy today. But for now, that's all from me. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.